Good morning and welcome to Contemporary Issues class. Good morning. It's time to start. We have a good presentation today on cities versus rural areas and how those political differences and how cities lose out to rural areas. And we'll have our usual spiritual connection to that too, so we will tie everything together. First, I want to welcome Heidi from California, Linda's daughter. And so Heidi, I'm Steve, and this is Ron, leaders of the class. Welcome here and invite you back.
Thank you very much.
And if you come back, and if you want to give us your email address, we'll put you on our list, or Mom can send you the one that I sent out. But we talk about all kinds of things here, and so I'd love to have you come back.
Yeah, thank you.
Or Zoom.
Or Zoom.
Right.
Or on Zoom too. Yes, and welcome Zoomers. Hi, Joe and Susan. Nice to have you here. Susan is in Toronto, Ontario, so we often have folks that are in different parts of the world. So, but our usual announcements first. Zoomers, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen on the mute icon so we keep the background noise down. And we are recording this for future playback. For folks who can't make it today and want to see it later, we keep a record of our classes. And I hope you will comment today. If you have questions, Ron usually allows questions with hands up during the presentation. So please feel free to ask questions and comment. Other announcements, we have a class party coming up on Thursday, September 1st here by the kitchen. And we're gonna have dinner and games, and there's a sign up going around if you'd like to bring something. Anything else, Alice, about that?
I think that's about that.
Okay.
Just let us know how, there's another page there. I need to know how many people will be coming, so we know how much meat to prepare.
Eat to prepare. There we go. And I want to welcome Eric back too from his travels in Asia. We were in Vietnam and South Korea. And what was it like over there?
Hot and humid.
Hot.
I won't do another summer trip to that.
Oh, really? Too hot a time to go. Was there a political thing going on?
Well, Philippines has a new president, the son of Ferdinand Marcos.
Oh, the sun.
So you've got some people protesting, but the majority of the Filipinos support it.
Was that the shoe lady that had the?
Yeah.
That was Ferdinand,
Yeah.
yeah, 3,000 pairs of shoes.
Wow.
And the son, Boom Boom, or whatever his nickname is, he's in charge now. But he's better than the last guy, Duterte, who was sort of a warmed over Trump in a flannel shirt. That cussed and made sexual references and did all kinds of extrajudicial things. You know, neighbors would accuse somebody of being a drug dealer, so police would come in the middle of the night, take them away, kind of like Argentina during the dirty war, and they would disappear. So this one is a little bit better, but there wasn't really any controversy in Vietnam. It's one party government. So,
A lot to see there. A lot of
oh yeah,
tourists.
they love Americans. Best I heard about China was from a tour guide. She says, well, we have kind of a love-hate relationship with China. Others will just tell you flat out. We love Americans. We'd like to have you come back to our country.
Bring your money.
Yeah, they want our money. They want our
Sure.
Okay, so this is Vietnamese.
Mhm. Charming people. Little kids came up to me. I was walking along the lake, and at first they approached me, and I kept walking. Oh, what? Finally, after the foods tour, the walking food tour, you go different places. I'm walking back along this lake to my hotel, and I thought, well, I'll listen to them because they had a little lanyard around their neck, and they was like 9 or 10 years old. And so little girl walked up, she says, oh, excuse me, sir, can I practice my English? Oh, how sweet. They'd be in groups of 3. And that's when I noticed that there would usually be a parent or an uncle or someone standing back, you know, with a lanyard, and they would be watching. So I felt like it was safe at that point. And the little boy says, well, that was the first group. Then I walked along, another group came up. This little boy says, tell me something new. And I said, well, I taught astronomy. So whenever you look up in the sky, you're looking back in the sky. Because it took 200 years for that light to get here. Then this Polish man who was standing nearby says, who's your favorite president?
Oh.
He says, mine is Lincoln.
Oh, wow.
That's what he tells me. And I said, so was mine. And then the little boy, about 10 years old, he pipes in. He was the 16th president. This kid knows more than most
Where-
Americans.
So,
That was one of the highlights. Low lights would be coming back from the Mekong Delta, and it took 5 hours because the traffic was so bad. And it's like the Wild West on the roads. You think a communist country, there'd be more rules, right?
Yeah.
The motorcycles were passing on the left and the right. Traffic is stopped, then moves a little, then it stops again. So 5 hours to get back to Saigon. Mekong Delta.
But you know, wherever you go in the world, there's nowhere where the traffic is regulated like here.
Hmm.
I haven't been anywhere in the
Well,
Middle East.
Seoul
I
would be
mean, they
close.
drive everywhere.
Seoul, South Korea would be closed. They
I
don't
haven't been
They
there.
don't run radar. They take pictures of your license plate. So they have stations that
They
take
get a
a picture and you'll just get a ticket. So people, even my limousine driver from the airport, they won't go over 10. It was like 100 was kilometers. Yeah.
Yeah.
62 miles an hour. It was very regulated. So
was horrible.
was it?
The cars didn't even stay in their lanes. They just went any old way.
No, that's what I noticed. The dash lines in the Philippines and Vietnam were mere suggestions. And so every time you pass somebody, you know, you're in a taxi or you're in a Lyft or something, every time they pass somebody, they honk first, and then pass them, because otherwise, because they'd be leaving. That's right.
Well, what a thought that we could appreciate our traffic here when we're stuck in traffic. And appreciate how organized we are. Thanks for sharing, Eric. Very good. Okay. Ron, tell us about cities versus rural.
Okay, we're gonna pass around the book that we drew most of the presentation today from, Why Cities Lose. So, and I just want to mention a book that's sort of related to it. Mark Feldmeyer mentioned this significantly in a sermon a good 3 or 4 years ago, the book, The Big Sort. And it talked about how America has and is, and to some degree always did, sort itself into distinct little colonies, communities. We're like birds, other species, so tribes. So
Birds of a feather flock together.
okay. So it's a pretty good book, although it's got a lot of data in it. It would be good to study statistics a little bit before. I left out some of the graphs because they got pretty mathematical. Median versus mean and delta between the two. And, yeah, a lot of stuff.
Dumb it down.
We'll bring it down to where we are. Another good book that I've mentioned in the past, Catherine Kramer wrote the book, The Politics of Resentment. She actually went out on a 3-month field trip in Wisconsin, visiting little taverns and villas and towns in Wisconsin, and talked to the people in the rural areas, trying to get a feel for how they felt about government and their political opinion, and what drove their thinking in many aspects. It's a book well worth reading. Then, of course, there's the book City Mouse, Country Mouse. Anybody read that as a kid in elementary school? Yeah, I know growing up, most of my relatives were out of the rural part of Cincinnati. And when we would visit them, I would get some of the City Mouse, Country Mouse feelings, how they view things a bit differently.
How many of us here grew up in the country, we could say,
Okay,
What about small town?
or small towns? Yeah, very good. So quite a few.
you get a different flavor. Okay, first slide. Okay, the book starts with a pretty in-depth look at the state of Pennsylvania. It talks about how in a state, and there's several of them that are more prone to this in this country, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, North Carolina, where when they have a state election, in other words, an election where, like for governor of Colorado, where everybody in Colorado votes for a governor or a senator. But then there's the state level offices, like your state representatives. That's a whole different game. And there's many states where, particularly more often than not, the Democrat wins a state level vote, like for senator, governor, but then gets creamed when it comes to putting in a collection of congressmen. A good example, this is reaching back a little bit, but it's still a good example of what has and does happen. The state of Pennsylvania, November 2012, the Democrats won all the Pennsylvania state races. Obama had 53%, Bob Casey, Democrat running for Senate, had 55%, and there were large Democratic majorities occurring for all the other state offices. But when it came to Congress, and Pennsylvania at that time had 18 congressional seats, maybe dropping to 70. But the Democrats, even having a majority of state votes that went Democrat, only won 5 of the 18 congressional districts. 2016, Trump won Pennsylvania by 44,000 out of 6 million cast, but the Republican Party won 60% of the state level houses, 68% of the state Senate districts, 72% of the congressional seats. So you say, what's causing this? Is it gerrymandering? Well, gerrymandering is part of it, but there's also something we'll call the geographic dispersion. And in a nutshell, and it's kind of the theme of this book, in general, people with more left and democratic leanings tend to congregate in cities, in urban areas. There's many plots and graphs in the book that show how there are tremendous concentrations of people that are more progressive, left, Democrat, we congregate together in certain areas. Whereas the Republican Party vote is much more, shall we say, efficiently distributed. It isn't jammed into certain areas. Dispersed. In the state of Pennsylvania, some have jokingly said, talking about the politics of Pennsylvania, said it's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh surrounded by Alabama. And there's some truth to that, because if you look at how Pennsylvania voted for president, Biden won, but you can see the counties there that went blue went for Biden. And you can see the counties that went red and went for Trump. Clearly, Trump won a majority of the counties, but Joe Biden had a victory margin by more than 80,000 votes in the state of Pennsylvania. Okay, next slide. This just shows in the Pennsylvania for state senator, not national, federal level senator, but state senator. Over the years, the GOP vote share, and it's hovered around recently, around 50%. It's bounced above the 50% line, below the 50% line. But the GOP's seat share of seats, again, at the state level, is running 10 to 20% consistently higher than their vote share. And again, it's because of this, the concentration. Next slide. That's another one. And this slide basically shows which counties went, but there's a whole bunch of counties over on the left side that are incredibly democratic, 80%, 70%, 90% and up. But there's not many that they're on the other side that go almost entirely Republican. So you end up with that Democratic vote getting clustered and concentrated. Next slide. In Wisconsin right now, the governor of Wisconsin is Evers. He's running for re-election, Tony Evers. But Here's the 8 congressional districts of the state of Wisconsin by color code. You can see how they vote, and there's 2 congressional districts that go overwhelmingly Democrat. Those are numbers 2 and 4. See the margin of victory up over, tremendous pluralities for the Democratic Party in those 2 congressional districts. But look at all those other districts where the GOP wins by often modest amounts, sometimes comfortable amounts.
Are those Milwaukee and Madison?
Well, 2 and 4 would be, yes. Yeah, 2 and 4. Milwaukee is number 4, and Madison, I believe, encompasses is in there number 2. And Evers is trying to get, there's a lot of court litigation going on in that state, Wisconsin, relative to redistricting. But they're trying to get the map on the right in place. That would put districts 1 and 3 in play, going from left to right. See the 1 and 3. If they redistrict it, that would make it so the Democratic Party would have a chance of winning those congressional districts. So whatever your politics, this is just a fact of life that it's happened. Okay, let's jump to Colorado. Look at a little bit of Colorado to understand. There's the counties. And the county on the left, the graph on the left, is the population density in Colorado. And you can see where the population is. It's on the Front Range, heavily on the Front Range.
Is that
If
the
we-
blue?
That's the blue.
Yeah, the dark blue.
The darker blue, the more the population. And if we look at the vote, blue is Democratic on the right, and the degree of blue is the degree of the Democratic vote. And we can see it, except for El Paso and Douglas County, the 2 kind of agree. Where the population is concentrated, the Democratic Party tends to do better. Next slide. Let's look also at economic prosperity.
Douglas County.
Douglas County is.
Trying to,
She's
I'm
working on
gonna
it.
try to help Douglas County go purple.
Okay.
Right.
Even if you study Douglas County and drive around it, Stephen and Doug Munner and I are always doing hikes. We drive through a lot of areas of the states. And we notice when we go down into an area of South Douglas County, there's all these Trump signs. And then we go in other places and it's a different ballgame. But looking at economic prosperity, the deeper the blue, and the blue has nothing to do with politics on that graph, but the more blue the county is, the more vibrant it is in terms of economic power, GDP of the county. And you can see where the economic power is. And where the economic power is where the people are. People got to go to where the jobs are. And so you end up with a strong correlation between economic prosperity and people clustering. That bottom right graph there also shows by zip code the population density. In that case, deep red means high population density zip codes. So by no means is Colorado equally distributed. And of course, you all know that from driving around here. You go out on the Eastern Plains, and there's nothing but windmills and an occasional farmhouse out there in Burlington.
Ron, is this consistent across the country that generally cities are Democrat and rural areas are Republican? For every state.
There's a couple little exceptions. Cincinnati tends to be a little more conservative, but even its inner core is more Democrat. Yes, the answer is a strong yes. And they trace it back to you can go back to the railroad in the early 1900s when the Industrial Revolution kicked off around 1885. You can track the railroad lines. The railroad lines were where industry went. Industry had to locate along railroads, and that's basically where you have I call them the common laborers. People worked at steel mills and factories And that's where the cities and towns grew up. And that's even today, you find, follow the rivers and the railroad track lines from years ago, you'll find more Democratic votes. It's passed
But
down.
even like the South, like the deep South and stuff, that's pretty conservative down there, even in the big cities, isn't it? Isn't it more red than blue?
We can do a study in that. Atlanta's a good example. Atlanta's a very modern city that's split.
Yeah, but I mean, like Mississippi and,
There's still that correlation.
Oh,
It's
they
not the
still-
same in all
okay.
areas of the country, but generally, Democrats win in cities.
Ron,
Okay.
Ron,
Go
is
ahead.
there any correlation between median individual income and political views?
Yes, strong correlation.
What is that?
The correlation is,
Higher income or Democrats.
it's changing though. It's changing rather quickly. 20 years ago, you could say the GOP wins in the over $150,000 income earners. That's starting to flip and change. What we're finding now is a significant migration of white folk moving into the GOP and the educated college graduates moving to the Democratic Party. It's intriguing. Yeah, I can show you more data. Okay, you've seen this one before. This is the population concentration in the United States shown in a graph. You can see, wow, Death Valley doesn't have many people, and the Dakotas are bare. And if you want to sell widgets, you better get to where your market is. You sell widgets where those bumps are. Okay, next slide. If you wanted to nail down 50% of the US population, all you got to do is get the blue counties in this on this graph. Surprisingly few. I mean, look at that. That's 50% of the US population.
Wow.
that's incredible.
Yeah, that is, yeah.
I thought there'd be more blue on the East Coast.
Or Chicago.
Well, it's, yeah, this is only population.
Yeah. Well, there's that eastern seaboard,
That is, yeah,
Is-
it's
is
a
pretty-
lot,
yeah.
but Chicago's pretty dense.
And again, blue has nothing to do in this case with political party. This is just, give me those counties and you got 50%. Just like the top, there's 9 states that have 50% of the US population. Okay, next slide.
Chicago incidentally is surrounded by cornfields. It is, that is true,
Yeah.
but it's pretty suburban. you
Just
know.
outside Chicago, there's a place called it.
Yeah.
If you want to sing a song about it.
2 different places.
Okay. And in Kramer's book, the lady that did the study in Wisconsin, she said, the second bullet, working class voters in the old industrial towns often cling to guns, religion, anti-immigration, anti-trade, and anger at people not like them. And so that's really what is a force that's kind of continuing to take hold and growing stronger in many areas of the country right now. Next slide. Okay, and I have to take a swipe here. And some of the this extreme religionists that take on incredibly antisocial positions. I love Jesus, but I hate minorities, independent-minded women, the poor, gay people, scientists teaching evolution, immigrants, and uppity educated folk.
All of us.
And children
Yeah.
after they're born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For you ladies in the class, I've always been amazed at some of the men in the older areas of the country and some of the newer areas just don't like intelligent women. They really, really get mad at women that are educated, dare speak up. And you can see an anti Nancy Pelosi, you know, they don't like her. And a lot of other women political figures who are just
Yeah.
torn at, ripped at because they're women. Women aren't supposed to be smart. They're supposed to be barefoot pregnant.
We don't like Condoleezza Rice.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, national, going to the national level, If we plot on the x-axis, the right party vote share, that in this case, in our country, it's the GOP, and the right party seat share, in other words, how many legislative seats you win. And if we had a perfect democracy, there'd be a 45-degree line where your vote share and your seat share all was agreed. But we find if we make the plot, it's that black line. And that black line, once you get above 40% of the vote, almost always is above the 45-degree line, substantially. Okay, next one. This is another graph that has the Republican vote share. The 50% line is right in the middle. The seat share is 50% going across the y-axis.
You want to explain?
And
that
explain
again?
it,
Yeah.
any state above the dash line. See that dash line that's 45 degrees?
Yeah,
Any dot above that 45-degree line
above and to the left.
means the right party, the right being the GOP, has collected more legislative seats than they have percentage of votes. So this has happened in most states. The states that don't fall under that are Connecticut, Oregon, California, believe it or not, Kentucky. Yeah, but the majority of states, there's a case where the party with the better dispersion of voters has done better in terms of their representation. Next slide. Population density versus right or left party being in our case, the Democrats. This is data from 4 different countries. Now, the data is a little bit dated. Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, and the USA. And look at as the population density increases, shall we say the Democratic or left party vote definitely goes up. So it's a more of an international thing than it is just something here. Next one. You've all heard of gerrymandering. This is maybe the most humorous and classical gerrymandering drawing that was real. This was in the 7th District, Pennsylvania, and they've nicknamed it Goofy Kicking Mickey.
Oh, yeah.
But they drew a congressional district. Get a load of that.
Yeah.
Is that gerrymandering? Wow, that's gerrymandering at its best.
Yeah.
But what can we do to maybe get a more representative democracy where the proportional vote lines up with the people that win the seats? Or do you even want that? I'm going to throw it out for the class for a minute here. In a way, when one party gets concentrated in one area, they mess themselves up. They can't win enough seats to get, in many cases, get a majority or get proportionally the kind of representation they should have, you could argue. Or others would argue, say, no, we want lawyers to represent blocks of land, not masses of people. So should you have representatives that represent shall we call it a block of land or a block of people? We're going to look at some of the remedies, if you want a remedy.
What's Wyoming like? There's hard, oh, well, okay.
It's,
Yeah.
it's as red as about red can get. West Virginia.
Is it Jared? I guess.
You don't have to. You don't have to gerrymander. It's so,
People in Wyoming used to.
So
say
red, you
there's
can't.
Jackson and then there's Wyoming.
yeah, you can't. It's almost,
So Ron, it has to do with one person, one vote.
yeah.
When you've concentrated, the vote that you give is not as powerful as the single person living out in a rural area.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're gonna look at that real quick. Let's go to the next slide. So there's what we call the rural and small state built-in advantage in our country. Again, the top 9 states with 50% of the population and the US Senate have 18 senators. The other 50% of the people get 82 senators. That's a tremendous disparity.
Right.
And you think of Wyoming that gets, 2 senators, and California
two senators, right,
senators.
Senators,
right.
exactly.
And
And
40
the
million people compared to 500,000.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's wild. Then, even in the electoral college, where you give each state number of votes according to its population, but they tip the scales there by giving each state 2 extra. So California gets 2 extra, but Wyoming also gets 2 extra. So that also tips the electoral college more in favor of rural areas. So rural areas get a tremendous advantage in the US Senate. I mean, tremendous advantage, and a significant advantage in the electoral college. And because of the geographic concentration factor, they also get an advantage in the House. So that's the way life turned out. The art of gerrymandering. This shows
You're not making us feel good.
reality. How to steal an election. Suppose you've got 50 precincts, 60% are blue and 40% are red. If you draw them like that middle case, you end up with the blue runs the table. Okay. But if you draw them like case on the right, you get 3 red and 2 blue. So there's a case where the right-hand carve up produces a 60% red advantage when the block count is 60%, 40 going the other direction. So the art of the good gerrymander is to try to pack as many of the opposing parties' voters into one district as possible, and then try to distribute the other ones so you win them all by 5%, 7%. That's the art of gerrymandering. Next. State of Ohio, my native town of Cincinnati. Cincinnati's been carved up. They split Cincinnati, so instead of putting it in one block, it's been carved up. And look at that shape on the right. Look at how they connected Warren County to Hamilton County. See that little slice there? Does that look like some gerrymandering going on? You betcha. And Ohio, by the way, back one, is definitely a red state now. It's maybe 53% GOP, 47% Dem, and it's maybe going even more red. But in the congressional representation, it's 12-4 in terms of the GOP. So with 53% of the vote, they get a 3-1 advantage because of the geographic dispersion of the
Okay, Ron, I have a
population.
question.
Go ahead.
Census, that's where those numbers come from. Okay, so we just had a census a couple of years ago, and I know a lot of states did redrawing of districts. Cincinnati, one of those where they redrew it, some of them,
Yeah,
is it Virginia, what state was it back east, where they saw what was going on and put a stop to it? It was in like Virginia or South Carolina, one of those states back there.
Yeah, how do we stop gerrymandering?
Ohio passed a law, and it was put on the state ballot, to set up a more fair redistricting thing. But it's turning out that it's hard to change. It's not working as effectively as they hope. But again, there's the 2 components. There's the true gerrymandering, but then there's what I call the geographic dispersion factor. We've hit hard today on the
We
geographic.
see that in Colorado.
Okay, next one. Again, there's Goofy kicking, Mickey kicking Goofy. How about that district in Texas? That's the city of Houston that they've gone around. It's like a kidney wrapped around.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's one for North Carolina. Get a load of that district there. The one in blue. Did you ever see such a contortion of, yeah, wow, that's beyond, almost beyond belief.
So
Yeah.
it's the government people in each state that decide.
Yes, oh, yeah.
Okay,
California passed a law, they have an independent group that does the redistricting. So it's a
Colorado's got
Yeah.
a stronger, yeah,
Colorado does too.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, California does. So it's not by the legislature.
that is.
So,
There's also a Supreme Court case coming up that's got people biting their nails.
yeah.
Where right now, it says the legislature can play a role in looking at the maps. And that the legislature, as interpreted by most states, it means the governor, the state senate and the state house, and the Supreme Court. That's the legislative branch. All together have to work together on a map. Supreme Court might make a decision saying it's just the legislature. I mean, just the state.
And we're screwed forever.
And if that goes through, it means that whoever has that numerical advantage in the state, local legislature could carve up the map more than a Thanksgiving turkey to their
But then
advantage.
it would change again. When the government changes, when your state government changes to a different party, then that map would change again. The
Yeah,
chances are
however-
good that
It
it
won't.
changes.
It
There's a
won't.
chance.
It won't change.
But we're saying because Pennsylvania was a good example in this book. Pennsylvania has, through the years, the last 50 years, it's virtually never gone Democratic in terms of control of the state house, state government in the House and Senate of Pennsylvania, because of this geographic, not the gerrymandering necessarily, but the geographic dispersion. The fact that all the Dems are in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. They've never been able to get control. Maybe one year was a little exception in the 70s, but virtually never got control and probably never will get control of the Pennsylvania government. The situation is pretty much the same in Ohio. Ohio has had a majority or super majority in the Ohio legislature since the 1950s. It shows little hope of that ever changing, no matter, simply because the Democrats are in the cities. Till they move out to rural areas of Ohio, it's not going to flip. So, okay. What can we do? Well, interestingly enough, if you study national Western democracy politics, there's something called proportional representation. And except for Britain and Britain's former colonies, this is actually the dominant form of how most European countries put their legislature together. They don't have one party or two parties. They allow multiple parties. And they have various rules how they distribute the legislative seats in proportion to the number of votes those parties get. They aren't winner take all. Britain and its former colonies, we're one of its former colonies, have these winner take all districts. The effects of this are kind of good. Competition between the urban parties versus the rural parties is much less. It's still there, but it's much less in Europe. And the new issues of the century, environmentalism, women's rights, multiculturalism, are much better handled. You don't have an old guard party that's stopping them. Next one. Keep an eye on the clock. So proportional representation. The country is divided into a series of large multi-member districts. Each party receives, a proportional number of votes. Netherlands has just one district. Some countries have smaller districts, but add at-large representative to match the seats awarded with the national popular vote. Okay, we go into more details. It's worked better in some, and that's just a graph of Canada on the right. If Susie's still there, she is. Canada's elections are unfair, unpredictable, and undemocratic. It talks about in Canada what the distribution of seats would be if they had fully proportional voting as opposed to winner take all. Next one.
interesting. Susan, do you want to comment on that? What's it like in Canada?
Well, this is because of the first past the post rule, and it is really unfair. And we do have a multi-party system, and so it really does put the most of the parties at a disadvantage because there's really only one vote. Now, some of the parties themselves, when they're electing their leadership, go through a series of votes, which is essentially first past the post, but then with each successive vote, then you're really representing the majority of the people that are voting. So it's a little bit more fair, but it's a really contentious issue up here.
Okay, interesting. All right,
Thank you.
all right. Next slide. Okay. Okay, we'll skip this one. To gain disproportionate power. You want to, if you're a right winger, you want to try to work on those bullets on the top. If you're a left winger, you want to try to get the bullets on the bottom in terms of what group of people you go for. Next slide. Voter suppression. Here's the techniques of voter suppression. We see those in action now. You try to purge the voter roll, try to make the registration far more complex. Texas, it's a felony for the state officers to send a ballot out that wasn't requested. Just the House. Eliminate automatic same-day registration, rigid ID requirements, fewer voting locations, little or no mail-in balloting, poll taxes, all this kind of things. Next. Okay, another thing, there's the national popular vote. And this passed in Colorado. It's a collection of states that said, we want a popular vote for president. Get rid of this electoral college. And they figured out how to do it. They said, if we get enough states on board, it'll say, we're going to cast Colorado's votes and the other states that are in a pack for whoever won the national vote, regardless of our state. If you get enough states on board for this, yeah, it depends on the size of the states.
But that's just for president.
That's just for president. Okay, excellent. So where the national popular vote is passed, the states in blue are where it's passed. The states in red are where it's made it to some level of passing, but hasn't passed. We're closer to implementing the national popular vote. 15 states have already signed it, which is 195 electoral votes. It's got to get to 270.
This is a workaround
It's a
for the
workaround.
electoral college
Yeah,
problem.
but those last 75 votes look like they're going to be hell to get. Yeah, it looks very, very difficult. Next one. Okay. Because of the electoral college system, here were the number of presidential visits and events held during the 2020 presidential election. And you can see almost all the visits were to swing states. Shows you the drawback of the electoral college. Yeah, the swing states get ignored. Okay, next. Okay, I've talked more than enough. Offended a few people, probably, but whatever. Let's talk it up. What do you think? Also, more political parties. One thing that's bad about our system is, I call it the package plan.
Yeah.
Each party kind of packages several issues together. You go GOP and you say, well, you get full gun rights for everywhere and everybody. You get anti-abortion. You get other things, and the same with the Democratic Party. You get a package plan. And a lot of people say it's like buying your TV channels. But I want these 3 channels, but I don't care about the Avalanche or the Beer Channel, or,
Right.
or How to Raise Rabbits channel. I just want these 3. And so with multi-parties, you can split the parties into groups that maybe collect, that you can buy into more. I think right now, the Republican Party is split into two wings. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the same with the Democrats, you know, some of the, particularly, we call them the wing nuts, the people way out on the edges of the right. But if there were more blocks to choose from,
Yes.
people would often say, yeah, I can go with, you know, the centrist party.
So there's that new group, is it called the Freedom Party? Or that they're trying to formulate,
Yeah,
that's got some Republican people and some,
Yeah, Yang
yeah.
got together
yes.
with
Oh, yeah.
2 other people, and they're trying to form,
Supposed to be
Right.
moderates.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's Christine Todd Whitman.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
yeah, there was,
And isn't that called the Freedom Party?
can't think what name they picked up, but the difficulty there is, if you have proportional voting, I think it really works well. If you don't have proportional voting, if you throw away 15–20% of the votes,
Yeah.
you literally throw them away, and you can make things even worse.
Right.
You could allow an even more vocal minority.
Now, we
Take control.
saw that a few elections when we had a third-party candidate running.
Same with the Bull Moose Party.
I didn't go back that far.
But you
But it
know,
was Ralph Nader, yeah, that they
Yeah.
say
oh,
was a
yeah,
third-party
remember that?
candidate that took
Well,
enough votes
Dan
away.
Perot,
Ross Perot.
Ross
Yeah,
Perot.
Ross
Yeah.
Perot, well, that they couldn't win, but they took enough votes from one side that they helped the other side. Interesting.
But you know, if we had as many parties as there are and accept those, you know, recognize that they are the parties that can represent the people that vote for them, then the 2 parties at the top would have that power. And they would have to, like in Germany, you have, let's say, 10 different parties,
Yeah.
right? And the main party, the biggest one,
Social
gets
Democrats.
only 49%. So they can't do anything. They need that 1%. So they need to get a small party, which is maybe more liberal or more
Yeah.
conservative, and let it into their organization.
Did Schultz
And I-
have to bring in the Greens in order to have a ruling
Yes.
coalition?
Yes, exactly.
That's what I thought.
And they were the opposite from what they believed,
Right.
you know? So, and here you have only 2. There's no choice.
Yeah,
You know, they have the power in their hands. Yeah. They're telling
Yeah,
me,
and they-
I
they-
do not vote here at
Yeah.
all.
We hear that about a lot of European countries, in Israel, they have to form a coalition.
Yes,
of
and
parties
then
to
you're
be
not
able-
as rigid anymore, see? If you have to
Right.
coalesce with the Green Party, which is liberal, then you're not as rigid anymore. You have to give them some say so in what is going on.
England too, don't they have, they're always fighting with each other, going back and forth.
They are really bad.
Yeah.
Which one?
Called cooperation, and we haven't seen that in our legislature.
No, we haven't seen
For
cooperation.
But you don't need to here. You don't need to here. This is a republic. This is not a democracy.
Absolutely. And that's a point I think a lot of people forget.
Yeah.
That it's not a democracy, because the founders didn't want the tyranny of the masses dictating
Exactly.
our laws, and that's why the Senate is set up.
It's probably, some would say it's an illusion. But I think for those who want to be bridge builders or agents of reconciliation, it's probably going to be on a micro level, not the macro level where it's power politics. It's as if you win, it's not as if you lose. But to understand, I think you're both probably the politics of resentment. Get at this. You need to understand why some people obviously feel so deeply the resentment that they feel. For example, sorry, Mary, but when Ponderosa High School opened, what, 25, 30 years ago, you were there. You had 2 types of persons in Douglas County. You had the ranchers and you had the preppies. So you understand what's happening in Douglas County. Have to look at what's been evolving here, why the politics are the way they are. If you're interested in seeing this in a state right now, Montana, those of you who have streaming devices that are interested in these types of things, Yellowstone on Peacock looks at what's happening in Montana right now between the indigenous, the ranchers, and the developers from Southern California and Dallas, Texas, and the cleavages and the politics that are taking place in Montana as a case study. So if you're looking at the resentment factor and understanding what's going on there, at least you get a deeper appreciation. And if you wish to do it on a micro level with people who differ, at least you have an understanding of why the hurts and the manifestations, gerrymandering, and citrus and so forth are taking place. Just a few thoughts. But certainly Yellowstone, if you're interested, it's pretty graphic. It's pretty graphic.
Great show.
The Yellowstone.
Yeah, it is, but it's.
Yeah,
But
Very well
in
done.
the end, it is always money and power. That's what. it
And
comes down
religion.
to. Who wants that country, the land,
Yeah.
That's the bottom line of everything, I think.
yeah, if we had a 3, 4, 5-party system, we wouldn't have what we had these last couple of bills that have gone through.
Yeah.
Where you get 100% of the party voting this way and 100% of the party voting. It's like,
Yeah.
we don't care about what's in the bill. It's us versus them.
Yeah.
And they spend so much energy
Tour guide,
fighting.
when I went through Europe with a high school. 18 years ago, this tour guide was from the Netherlands. He spoke 5 languages. He said, your system's broke. He said, if you've got 2 parties, they can't get anything done. That was this guy from the Netherlands commenting on our government, in 2004.
Part of the problem is that so many of our legislators value their R's or their D's more than their A's. They're party first, American second.
Yeah.
The New York Times has had a lot of articles lately about how highly organized the Republican Party is now to go into the states and dominate state legislatures and change the rules there so that they can win elections. And says they're much farther ahead of the Democratic Party in doing this. So it's all come about because of contesting elections, Trump saying that the election was stolen, and so that started all of the state GOP organizations to say, let's develop ways that we can dominate elections in the future without having to just claim that it's been stolen.
And not just legislature, but school boards. They're moving into school boards.
Yeah.
But it's all big money behind them.
Exactly.
And that's where, like, the school boards in Douglas County, there's big money behind that. So there's big money behind these candidates that they want.
When our
Not just
school board,
Joe
Douglas
Schmo.
County School Board was taken over in
Yeah.
2010 or 11.
Well,
People for the American Way, Bill
I
Bennett,
remember
all
that.
those outside groups were coming in, and telling the school board, here's what you need to do. You need these-
Yeah.
These 4 things. Vouchers was the first one. 500 people would get a voucher so they could send their kid to register to the ballot.
But that only lasted a short time.
Right.
And then
the
that got
state-
voted
then the
out.
State Supreme Court said no.
Yeah, and then now they've got this group in here now that they had, I heard out of state big money came in.
My question is, how long can we survive with the tail wagging the dog?
Forever.
At some point, the masses of the people are gonna say,
You're gonna have
we're
a
out of here.
revolution.
Yeah, even in Kansas with the recent vote, if there's not been a popular vote in Kansas on the abortion issue. If that would have strictly just gone to the state legislature, abortion would be banned in Canada.
Right.
But,
Kansas.
yeah, but it looks like the voters decoupled themselves from party dictates and voted how they felt. We'd have a better democracy, more of a democracy. If that happened.
It will happen in my lifetime, but I can just see Civil War again all over.
There was a talk on PBS NewsHour this past week by an expert that she has written a book about things that lead up to a civil war. And they said, and the commentator, whichever one it was, said, well, why is this gonna happen? And she says, well, if you look back at history, it's when a group of people feel despondent or despairing. Like, they don't just lose the 2020 election like Trump, they lose the next one, and then one after that. And then you get these people like the kook in Ohio that stormed the FBI field office with a nail gun and AR-15. They get to the point where they're despairing. Because they don't think they're ever gonna get back in the power.
But the thing is, on that example, they're already in power, except for the
Who's that?
presidency. When you looked at the
state, yeah.
the
Yeah.
state set up, I don't see where there's any hope for my team.
We've got just a couple minutes left. Final thoughts, questions for Ron? Ron, what do you think? Will it ever change? Will our system ever change? What will drive that?
Wow.
Loaded question.
I wish, it looks like our system has been set up in such a way that it's hell to change it.
Yeah.
The very groups that have got the control are the ones that have to acquiesce to surrendering that control.
And they're not.
And they don't want to do it. Get rid of the electoral college. I'd love to get rid of the electoral college. But the small states, the Wyomings, the North Dakotas,
They'll fight it.
fight it tooth and nail. Who knows what the future may hold?
Okay, thank
All
you,
right.
Ron, for a good presentation. Thanks, everybody. Bye,
Thank
Susan.
you, Ron. Bye.
Bye, Susan.
Great week. Bye.
Farmers market. That's what I mean.
I was